You cannot defy us.
I will not yield.
Then face the consequences.
So be it!
On the night Alpha Kale rejected his human mate before the entire pack, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. No one would remember the wind. No one would remember the way the torches flickered too low for a calm evening. They would only remember his voice. Clear. Commanding. Unquestioned. I, Alpha Kale, reject you, Aria, as my mate. You are weak. You do not belong to wolves. The words carried across the clearing and settled over the gathered pack like falling ash. There was laughter after. Not the laughter of humor. Not the laughter of joy. But the thin, cutting sound of agreement. The kind that tells someone they are alone. Aria stood in the center of it. Unmoving. Her hands did not tremble. Her lips did not part to defend herself. She did not plead. Those who stood closest would later say something strange about that moment. They would say she looked calm. As if the rejection had not surprised her. As if she had been waiting for it. As if this was not the worst night of her life. But the beginning of something else. She slowly lifted her gaze, not toward Kale, not toward the wolves who mocked her, but toward the sky above the clearing. And for the briefest second, her eyes reflected silver. A color no human should possess. Color no wolf there recognized. But no one noticed. 'Cause they were watching Kale. They were watching the Alpha. And they believed the story they had always told themselves about the quiet human girl who never shifted, never argued, never fit. They believed she was weak. They believed she was unnecessary. They believed rejecting her was correcting a mistake. What they did not know, what none of them understood in that moment, was that far above the clearing, the moon had shifted behind a passing cloud. And the light that touched Aria's face did not look the same as it had before. No one recorded that detail. No one thought it mattered. But later the elders would remember. They would remember the way the night felt heavier than it should have. They would remember the way the forest had gone quiet. They would remember that the wolves at the edge of the clearing had begun to whine softly, without knowing why. And they would realize that the rejection was not the only thing that happened in that clearing. Something else had begun. Aria lowered her gaze from the sky. She did not look at Kale again. She did not look at the pack. She turned her body slowly, carefully, as though she were stepping out of a place that no longer concerned her. And she walked away. No guard followed. No order was given to stop her. Because in the mind of every wolf present, she was already gone. Already dismissed. Already forgotten. What none of them understood was that this was the last moment they would ever see Aria as they knew her. And years later, when the story of that night was told in hushed voices around distant fires, the wolves who had stood there would say the same thing. They had all been watching the Alpha, when they should have been watching the girl who looked at the moon. They called her human the way one might label a flaw, a word used often, casually, repeated so many times that it stopped sounding like a description and started sounding like a verdict. Humans. As if that single word explained everything they did not understand about her. Why she never shifted under the full moon. Why she never joined the hunt. Why she never raised her voice when accusations circled her like vultures. When the prey escaped, they said it was because she distracted the pack. When a pup fell ill, they said her presence poisoned the air. When the weather turned harsh, they said the moon disapproved of her. And each time, Aria accepted the blame without argument. She had a way of lowering her eyes when they spoke to her. A way of standing still long enough that others forgot she was there. A way of surviving without leaving a mark on anyone's attention. Everyone believed this silence came from weakness. Everyone except the elders. Because the elders had noticed something earlier that evening. Something they had not spoken aloud. Mark. Faint. Curved, barely visible against the skin of her inner wrist when she reached for a bowl during supper. One of them had frozen mid-sentence when he saw it. Thin crescent, pale like old light. He had looked again to be certain, but Aria had already pulled her sleeve down. He told himself it was nothing. A trick of the eyes. A crease in the skin. An old scar he had never noticed before. But when Kale spoke the rejection in front of the pack, that same elder felt a sudden heat in the air. Not around the alpha, not around the wolves gathered in the clearing, but around her. He watched, unnoticed in the crowd, as Aria's hand tightened slightly at her side, as though she were holding something back, as though something inside her had reacted to the words. And in that instant, the faint crescent beneath her sleeve burned, not with fire, but with light, so soft no one else saw it, so brief no one else noticed, but long enough for the elder's breath to catch in his throat. He did not understand what he was seeing, only that it did not belong to humans, and it did not belong to wolves. He wanted to step forward, to say something, but the moment passed. The laughter drowned his hesitation. The rejection continued, and Aria walked away. Later, when the clearing emptied and the night returned to its usual sounds, the elders did not speak to one another immediately. They waited, each wondering if the others had seen what he had seen, each hoping he had imagined it, because there were old stories the pack no longer told. Stories about marks that appeared without warning. Stories about symbols that only revealed themselves when fate had already moved. Stories that began with a crescent and ended with the fall of leaders who had thought themselves untouchable. And as the elders stood beneath the dimming torches, one thought pressed heavily into their minds. The mark had not been there yesterday, and it had reacted to the rejection. What the Alpha didn't know would destroy him later was that the moon had been watching. She returned to her small room at the edge of the pack house without being stopped. No one followed. No one asked where she was going. In the minds of the wolves, the matter had already been settled. The human had been dismissed. The pack had corrected an inconvenience. The night could continue without her. The door to her room closed with a soft wooden sound that did not echo down the corridor. Inside, the space was bare. A narrow bed, small table, a single window that faced the tree line beyond the compound walls. Aria did not light the candle. She stood in the darkness for several long seconds, listening, not to voices, not to footsteps, but to something farther away, something beyond the pack house, the forest. Then she moved with quiet purpose. She took nothing with her, no bag, no cloak, no food, as if she had known for a long time that when this night arrived, she would not need anything that belonged to this place. When she opened the door again, the hallway was empty. The celebration in the central clearing had grown louder, drifting through the night air in distant bursts of laughter and music. No one noticed the human girl walking past the outer torchlight. No one noticed her crossing the final boundary stone that marked the edge of pack territory. But the moment her bare foot touched the soil beyond it, the forest changed. Crickets stopped mid-song. Leaves stilled despite the wind. Even the night birds fell quiet. It was not the silence of danger. It was the silence of attention. Far in the distance, a wolf howled. Then another. Then several more, from different directions. Not sharp. Not alarmed. Low. Long echoing. The kind of howl wolves use when acknowledging something greater than themselves. Aria stopped walking. She did not look frightened. She did not look surprised. She lifted her hand slowly and turned her wrist toward the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. The crescent mark glowed. Faint at first. Then brighter, like light rising through skin rather than resting on it. Her fingers trembled not from fear, but from recognition. For the first time since she had arrived at the pack months ago, her expression shifted. Not into relief. Not into sadness, but in certainty. She exhaled softly, almost as if releasing a breath she had been holding for years. And in a voice barely louder than the rustling leaves, she whispered, "It's time." The words were not spoken to the forest. They were not spoken to by the moon. They were spoken like a response, as though something unseen had been waiting for her to say them. And as she resumed walking deeper into the trees, the wolves in the distance did not follow. They parted, one by one, their howls fading into a low, reverent quiet. Because without knowing why, every wolf within miles felt the same instinct pressing down on their chest. Something had just crossed into the forest that did not belong to any pack. Something older than territory, older than rank, older than memory. And back at the pack house, where laughter still carried into the night, no one yet realized that the human they had rejected had not simply left. She had been received. Kale celebrated that night as though a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Torches were raised higher. Barrels were opened. Meat roasted over wide fires in the center of the clearing where the rejection had taken place only hours before. He stood before the pack with confidence restored, announcing his decision to name a new chosen Luna. Pure-blood wolf. Strong. Admired. Certain in her place among them. Everything he said without saying her name. That Aria had never been. The pack responded with approval. With relief. With the comfort that comes from believing order has been restored. Music began. Voices overlapped. Cups struck against wood in celebration. And for a while no one noticed the sky. Changed slowly at first. The stars above the clearing seemed to fade, not one by one, but all at once as if dimmed behind a veil no one had seen pass overhead. A wolf near the outer ring of the celebration was the first to glance up. He frowned. Then another did the same. Conversations faltered not because of what they saw but because of what they felt. A heaviness pressing down from above. The clouds moved in unnaturally fast, swallowing the sky in thick layers that seemed too dense for the calm night air. The torches flickered lower. The fire cracked louder. Then the moon emerged from behind the cloud cover. And several wolves stepped back instinctively. It looked larger than it should have. Not closer exactly, but heavier, as if its presence had weight, as if it were not simply hanging in the sky, but leaning toward the clearing. Watching. An elder who had not joined the dancing, stood abruptly from his seat. His eyes fixed on the moon with growing unease. "That is not a normal moon," he said quietly, though the words carried farther than he intended. Kale heard him and laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "The old stories again," he called out. "The moon does not concern itself with pack politics." The wolves tried to laugh with him. Some did. But the sound came out thin. Because their instincts had begun to react in ways they could not control. A low whimper escaped from one wolf's throat. Then another. Several shifted their weight uneasily, glancing toward the forest line as if expecting something to step out of it. Pups clung to their mothers. Even the newly chosen Luna felt a chill she could not explain. No threat had appeared. No enemy had approached. And yet every wolf in the clearing felt the same undeniable truth pressing against their senses. They were being observed. Measured. The elder who had seen the mark on Aria's wrist earlier that evening did not take his eyes off the moon. His breathing had grown shallow. Because the last time he had seen the sky behave this way, he had been a young wolf listening to stories he had dismissed as myth. Stories about nights when the moon did not shine for wolves, but for someone else. And as the celebration dissolved into uneasy silence, a realization crept slowly into his thoughts. This change in the sky had not begun when Kale named a new Luna. It had begun the moment Aria crossed the pack boundary. Something ancient had awakened, and it was not here for the alpha. Miles away from the uneasy clearing, Aria walked deeper into the forest without slowing her pace. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, layered with roots, thorns, fallen bark, and sharp stones that would have torn skin from anyone else moving through it in the dark. But her steps remained unbroken. Thorns brushed her ankles and slipped aside without leaving a mark. Low branches shifted subtly before she reached them, bending just enough to clear her path. The undergrowth did not resist her passage. Yielded. If someone had been watching from a distance, they would not have seen struggle. They would have seen accommodation. The forest was not something she pushed through. It was something that adjusted around her. A deer standing between two trees lifted its head as she approached. Its muscles tensed at first, ready to flee. Then, slowly, it lowered its head instead. Not in fear. In acknowledgement. An owl above her shifted along its branch to keep her in view, following her movement with steady, unblinking attention. Further off, a pair of wolves stepped out from the shadows. Rogues, by the look of them lean, wary, used to defending their territory without mercy. They did not growl. They did not bare their teeth. They stepped aside and watched her pass. Aria did not look at them. She did not seem surprised by their presence. She moved with the quiet certainty of someone walking a path she had traced in her mind many times before. Eventually, the trees began to thin, and the sound of running water reached her ears. A river cut through the forest ahead, wide and restless, reflecting the swollen moon in broken silver fragments. She stepped to its edge. For the first time since leaving the pack grounds, she stopped walking. The current rushed past, loud in the silence of the night. She looked down at the water, and slowly stepped forward. Her foot touched the surface, and the current shifted. Not dramatically, not violently, but enough. The water parted just slightly around her ankle, bending away as if making space rather than resisting intrusion. Ripples moved outward in perfect circles, disturbing the moon's reflection. Aria looked down into the river, herself. And what looked back was no longer what the pack had known. Her face was the same, but her eyes, they were no longer the dull brown the wolves had mocked. They were silver now, fully, bright, alive with a light that did not come from the moon above, but from somewhere within. She stared at her reflection for a long moment, as if reacquainting herself with something she had not seen in a very long time. Her hand rose again to her wrist. The crescent mark glowed steadily now, no longer faint, no longer shy beneath her skin. Its light pulsed in a quiet rhythm with her breathing. She did not smile. She did not react with surprise. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, as though listening to something far away, something calling her forward. And when she opened them again, there was no hesitation left in her expression. She stepped fully into the river and crossed to the other side with slow, deliberate movements, the water continuing to part subtly around her legs as she passed. Behind her, the forest remained still, watching, waiting, because what moved through it tonight was not prey, not a predator, not a wolf, and not human. But no one in the pack knew that the girl they had dismissed so easily had never been human at all. Back in the clearing, confusion arrived without warning. One wolf stumbled mid-step as if struck from behind. He did not cry out. He did not clutch his chest. He simply dropped to one knee, breath leaving him in a sudden rush. Those nearest to him turned, thinking he had fainted from drink or exhaustion. Then another wolf fell the same way. And another. Within seconds, the pattern spread through the crowd like an invisible wave. Wolves lowered themselves to the ground, not in pain, not in injury, but in something far stranger. Submission. They did not understand why they were doing it. Their muscles moved before their minds could argue. Spines bowed, heads lowered, hands pressed into the dirt as if answering a command no one had spoken aloud. Panic flickered through the clearing. What is happening? Stand up. Kale's voice cut through the confusion with practiced authority. On your feet, he ordered. His alpha tone sharp and resonant. Normally, that voice alone would have forced obedience. Wolves would have straightened instantly, instincts responding before thought. But this time, nothing happened. Those on the ground remained there, trembling. Those still standing began to feel the same pressure building behind their ribs, pushing them downward. Kale's expression hardened. He stepped forward, projecting more force into his command. I said stand. His voice echoed across the clearing. And still the wolves did not rise. A quiet dread began to settle over him, because for the first time since becoming alpha, his command had met resistance from something that was not defiance. It was overridden. An elder, the same one who had seen the mark on Aria's wrist, was already kneeling. His head was bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the ground. His voice shook as he spoke. The moon has chosen a higher authority. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Kale turned toward him, anger flashing across his face. Impossible, he growled. But even as he said it, he felt it. A pressure in the air that did not belong to him. A presence that seemed to press down on his shoulders, heavier than rank, older than leadership. His chest tightened. Not from fear. From recognition. His instincts, those same instincts that had guided him in battle, in command, in dominance, were reacting in a way he could not control. They were telling him to bow. He clenched his fists, resisting the urge with visible strain. Around him, nearly the entire pack was now on their knees, whimpering softly, eyes lowered, not to him, to something else, something far away, something none of them could see. The elder lifted his head just enough to whisper, his voice barely audible. This has not happened in generations. Kale's gaze lifted slowly toward the dark forest beyond the clearing, toward the direction Aria had walked. And for the first time that night, a thought formed in his mind that he did not want to acknowledge. His power was being overshadowed, not challenged, replaced. The first scout ran into the clearing so fast he nearly fell. Mud streaked his legs. His breathing came in sharp, uneven pulls as though he had not stopped running since leaving the tree line. He did not bow. He did not greet the alpha. He simply spoke. She crossed the northern boundary and the forest bent toward her. The words sounded confused even to him, as if he did not fully understand what he had witnessed. Another scout arrived seconds later, eyes wide, voice unsteady. The rogues didn't attack her, he said. They walked beside her, like guards, like escorts. A ripple of unease passed through the wolves still kneeling in the dirt. Rogues did not escort strangers. Rogues did not show respect. Rogues survived by answering to nothing. Yet tonight they had answered to her. The elders exchanged looks that no one else in the clearing understood. Color drained slowly from their faces. One of them closed his eyes briefly, as if confirming a fear he had hoped would remain only a suspicion. When he spoke, his voice was low, strained, and carried the weight of something very old. She carries the mark of the first Luna. The clearing fell into a deeper silence than before. Even the fire seemed quiet. Kale stared at the elder, his mind struggling to process the words. That legend was not part of modern pack teachings. It belonged to the oldest stories, the ones told to pups as myths before sleep. Stories about a time before alphas ruled packs, before territory lines, before wolves chose their leaders. A time when the moon chose for them, and the one it chose bore a mark. Crescent. Kale's heart gave a hard, painful thud against his ribs, because that legend had only one meaning. The mark of the first Luna did not belong to a mate of an alpha. It did not belong to any pack. It belonged to the mate of the Wolf King. Not a title earned. Title summoned. The ruler is recognized directly by the moon itself. Several wolves looked toward Kale instinctively, waiting for him to deny it, to dismiss it, to restore order with a single command. But he did not speak, because for the first time that night, the pieces began to align in his mind. Her silence, her calm. The way she had looked at the sky after the rejection. The way the air had felt different the moment she left. The way his authority was now being pressed down by something unseen. He swallowed hard, and realized with growing dread that the human he had rejected before the entire pack was now walking through the forest marked by a legend no wolf alive had ever witnessed. And if the legend was true, then she was never meant to be his Luna. She was meant to be something far greater. They did not rush into the stone clearing. Even the bravest among them slowed their steps as the trees thinned and the pale rock became visible through the branches. Torches were lowered without instruction. Voices faded on their own. What waited ahead did not invite noise. This was a place spoken of in fragments, never in detail. A place young wolves were warned away from without explanation. No borders marked it. No scent claimed it. And yet every wolf knew, without being told, that this ground did not belong to packs. It belonged to the moon. The elders felt at first a pressure behind the ribs, a quiet insistence in the blood that urged reverence. Several wolves stopped at the edge of the trees and could not force themselves to step forward. Their bodies resisted as though an invisible line had been drawn across the forest floor. Then they saw her. Aria stood at the center of the clearing on the smooth, pale stone. She was not moving. She was not searching. She was not hiding. She stood as though she had arrived exactly where she intended to be. Her face was turned upward, eyes open, reflecting the enormous moon above. Her hair shifted slightly in a breeze no one else seemed to feel, and around her skin faint at first, then unmistakable was a soft silver glow that did not belong to torchlight or reflection, came from her. The wolves did not understand what they were seeing, but none of them could look away. This was no longer the quiet human girl who had stood in their clearing hours earlier and accepted humiliation without protest. This was someone else entirely. Someone who stood with the calm of a person who had stepped into a role long waiting for her. Cale felt his throat tighten. He took a step forward onto the stone despite the resistance crawling up his spine. The moment his foot touched the clearing, a strange sensation ran through him as though he had entered a place where his authority had no meaning. He opened his mouth to speak her name, Aria, but the word never left his lips. A howl tore through the night. It did not begin nearby. It rolled in from far beyond the mountains, low and immense, vibrating through the air with such depth that the stone beneath their hands seemed to hum in response. Every wolf froze. The sound was not wild, not frantic, not territorial. It was commanding, ancient. The kind of howl that did not ask to be heard. It expected to be obeyed. The wolves felt it before they processed it. Their bodies reacted first. Knees hit the stone one after another in a wave that circled the clearing. Heads bowed. Shoulders lowered. Breath shortened into quiet, involuntary whimpers. Cale tried to remain standing. He fought the instinct with visible strain, his muscles trembling as he resisted the pressure forcing him down. But when the howl echoed again, closer now, heavier, undeniable, his legs gave way beneath him. His palms struck the cold stone as he bowed forward with the rest of the pack. No alpha voice could rise against this. No command could counter it. Because this authority did not come from rank. Came from the origin. Branches cracked beyond the tree line. Low, measured, unhurried steps approached through the forest. Not the careless movement of a rogue. Not the stalking gait of a hunter. This was a walk that assumed the path would open. And it did. The trees at the edge of the clearing seemed to part as a figure emerged from the shadows. Broad. Wrapped in darkness and moonlight at the same time. He did not rush. He did not need to. Every wolf present already knew who he was before their eyes confirmed it. Their instincts had named him the moment the first howl reached their ears. The Wolf King. A presence out of legend, out of story. Standing now on the edge of the stone clearing as though he had always belonged there. His gaze did not sweep over the kneeling wolves. It did not linger on Cale. It went directly to Aria. And she lowered her eyes from the moon for the first time since they arrived. She looked at him. Not with surprise. Not with fear. But with recognition that ran deeper than memory. The silver light around her skin brightened, responding to his presence like flame meeting air. And in that silent exchange, every wolf in the clearing understood something without needing it spoken. He had not come because of the pack. He had not come because of the alpha. He had come because the moon had called him. And the moon had called him to her. Cale did not lift his head immediately. He remained bowed on the stone, palms pressed flat against the cold surface, breath unsteady as the weight of what he was witnessing settled over him in layers. He had felt fear before in battle, in challenge, in the presence of stronger wolves. This was not fear. This was a realization. Low, heavy, unavoidable. He forced himself to look up. His eyes found Aria first. She stood exactly where she had been, silver light tracing her form. Her posture calm in a way that now made painful sense to him. She did not look overwhelmed. She did not look surprised by the arrival of the Wolf King. She looked expected. As if this moment had been approaching long before he ever spoke the words of rejection. And then his mind began to replay everything he had ignored. Her silence when the pack mocked her. Her patience when blamed for things she never argued against. The way she had watched him, not with admiration, not with resentment, but with a distant understanding he had mistaken for weakness. The night he had raised his voice at her for failing to shift. The day he had told her she was a burden to the pack. The moment, only hours ago, when he had rejected her loudly, confidently before everyone. Public. Cruel. Certain. He felt his chest tighten as though something inside him were being squeezed slowly. "She was my mate," he whispered. The words were not spoken to the pack. They spoke to himself. A desperate attempt to anchor what was slipping through his grasp. An elder beside him shook his head slowly. His voice filled with a quiet grief. "No, she was never yours." Cale's gaze snapped toward him. But he knew the truth of it before the elder finished speaking. A mate bond could be rejected. But destiny could not. And what stood in the clearing now had never belonged within the boundaries of his pack. The Wolf King stepped forward across the stone. Each movement was deliberate, unhurried, carrying a presence that pressed against every wolf's senses. He did not glance at Cale. He did not acknowledge the kneeling pack. He stopped directly in front of Aria. For a moment, they simply stood facing one another. The silver glow around her skin brightened in response to his nearness, as if recognizing something it had been waiting for. Cale watched, unable to look away, his heart pounding in painful rhythm. This was the moment he understood the full weight of what he had done. He had not rejected a weak human. He had rejected someone chosen long before he was born. The Wolf King lowered his head, not in dominance, not in claim, but in honor. A gesture so rare, so profound, that several wolves in the clearing gasped softly despite themselves. Because this was not a claim of a mate. This was an acknowledgement of a choice already made. By the moon itself. And as Cale knelt there, watching the Wolf King bow before the girl he had humiliated hours earlier, a single thought echoed in his mind with unbearable clarity. He had never had the right to reject her. He had only exposed how blind he truly was. The clearing did not immediately return to silence. Even after she turned away, even after the Wolf King's presence began to fade into the shadows of the forest, the air remained changed, heavier, older, as if the land itself had not yet decided whether it should breathe again. Cale was still on his knees. The stone beneath him felt colder than before. Not physically but in a way that seemed to reach into his thoughts, separating him from everything he once believed he controlled. His throat moved. He tried to speak again. And this time the word came out broken. "Aria." It was not an alpha's command. Not even a plea with structure. Just a name collapsing under its own weight. For a long moment, nothing answered him. Only the distant movement of the forest where she had gone. And then, a shift in the air. Subtle at first. Like the moon itself adjusting its gaze. Aria stopped walking. Not because she heard him clearly, but because something about his voice still carried meaning even if faint. She did not turn immediately. The silver light around her dimmed slightly, as though the emotion behind her had been carefully placed away. When she finally looked back over her shoulder, it was not the girl the pack had rejected who looked at him. It was something quieter, further, like a memory that no longer belonged to the present. Cale lifted his head just enough to meet her eyes. And what he saw made his chest tighten. There was no anger there. No sadness. No revenge. Only distance. As though everything that had happened in the clearing belonged to a different life entirely. A life she had already stepped out of. "You rejected what you did not understand," she said softly. Her voice did not echo. It didn't need to. The clearing itself seemed to hold on to it. A few wolves flinched at the sound not because it was loud, but because it felt final. Her gaze did not stay on Cale for long. It drifted past him. Not toward hatred. Not toward forgiveness. But toward irrelevance. "The moon did not," she added. That was all. No accusation. No explanation. Just truth stated the way natural forces are stated. unchangeable, unmoved. Then she turned away again. And this time she did not stop. The moment the clearing lost her. As she stepped forward, the silver light around her intensified, not like a glow, but like something responding to recognition. The stones beneath her feet no longer felt empty. They felt aligned, like they had been waiting for this exact movement. Behind her, Kale made one last attempt to rise. His hand lifted from the ground. His body shook, but he could not stand. Not because of force, but because of understanding. Something in him finally accepted what his authority had been too proud to see. She was never within his reach. Not once. Not ever. The Wolf King's silence. The Wolf King did not move immediately. He watched her as she approached. Not as someone to claim. Not as someone to possess. But as someone returning to a place they had always belonged to. When she reached him, he lowered his head again slightly, deliberately. Not submission. Recognition. The forest itself seemed to exhale at the gesture. Even the wind changed direction. The pack realizes too late. Back in the clearing, the wolves began to rise slowly. Not because the pressure lifted, but because their bodies could no longer remain in stillness. Confusion spread. Unease deepened. An elder whispered something no one wanted to hear out loud. "She was never part of us." Another answered, voice shaking. "We were only allowed to see her until the moon returned." Kale heard them, but he did not respond. Because in his mind, the truth had already settled into place. Not like revelation, but collapse. The last sight. Aria and the Wolf King stepped into the forest together. Not rushing, not disappearing, but simply continuing forward as though the world beyond the clearing was the only direction that had ever mattered. The silver light faded slowly with distance. Not vanishing, just withdrawing, as if it no longer needed to remain visible. The forest closed behind them without sound. No dramatic exit, no final gesture, just absence, complete. Kale remained on the ground long after they were gone. The pack slowly began to disperse behind him. No celebration remained. No order. Only fragments of confusion trying to form meaning. And in that emptiness, the realization finally arrived fully. Not as an emotion, but as a consequence. The alpha did not lose his mate that night. He lost the right to ever be remembered as her equal. The camera does not move. The forest is empty now. But not quiet. Feels watched. Then the final line. And long after she disappeared into the forest with the Wolf King, Alpha Kale would remember the exact moment he chose pride over destiny.